Lux Radio Theater first hit the airwaves in 1934. Based in New York, it premiered on the Blue Network. It would continue over the years on CBS and also on NBC. While the show would eventually move to Hollywood, during its New York run, it adapted popular Broadway plays. Lever Brothers was the main sponsor, using its Lux brand of soap and detergents for the name. Each broadcast was an hour long and recorded in front of a live audience. The first broadcast was an adaptation of Seventh Heaven with Miriam Hopkins, and it occurred on a Sunday afternoon, October 14th, 1934. When film stars traveled east, the competition for appearances was high. Lux Radio Theater was one of many choices, and producers had to be creative to attract stars. In his book, On the Air, the Encyclopedia of Old-Time Radio, John Dunning tells the story of one enterprising Lux agent. One bright young fellow, as he was described by Radio Guide, simply grabbed up Leslie Howard's suitcases and led him through a gauntlet of competing agents to a waiting cab. Only when they were settled in the car did it occur to Howard to ask who he was. "I'm from the Lux Radio Theater, and you're going to act for us tomorrow night," said the brash young fellow. He had caught and subsequently booked a hot young star by knowing that a man will always follow his suitcases. By 1935, the ratings had dropped and the show's future was uncertain. Danny Danker was tasked with revamping the show. Feeling that the future of radio was going west, he proposed moving the show to Hollywood. He also recommended adapting popular current Hollywood films and increasing the show's budget. In June of 1936, the show moved to Hollywood, a daring move for that time, as much of the radio world was still centered in New York. Immediately, the show was able to entice Cecil B. DeMille to host the show. He was paid $2,000 an episode. This would be equivalent to about $37,000 in 2021. DeMille had a reputation for bigness. While accounts vary as to how involved he was with the show, from the audience's viewpoint, it was his show. He would introduce each show, interview the stars, and close out the show, inviting people back next week.
This is Cecil B. DeMille saying good night to you from Hollywood.
The first big stars the show attracted after arriving in Hollywood were Marlene Dietrich and Clark Gable. This drew an audience that many estimate was as high as 40 million people. Danny Danker's daring move had paid off, and Lux soon asserted itself as a powerful force in radio. Stars could earn as much as $5,000 for a 60-minute appearance. This translates to about $96,000 in 2021. Studios loved it because it promoted their films to huge audiences. So while other radio shows had to record around the stars' shooting schedules, Lux had the ability to make studios change schedules to accommodate them. The move to Hollywood not only gave the show a transformative boost, but it drew other shows out west as well. By the following year, Radio Guide reported that 90% of the big-time personality shows were in Hollywood. The show was recorded live, with the audience's reactions being part of the charm of the show. Of course, recording live made for some interesting moments, but for the most part, the show took everything in stride, and consistent entertainment was delivered each week. One example was in 1948, when Burt Lancaster was late for an appearance of I Walk Alone. Director Fred McKay grabbed a bit player, Ira Grossel, and said, "You do Burt's part, I'll do yours." Audiences hardly knew the difference when Lancaster took over in the middle of the act. Grossel would later become a star himself, but you probably know him better as Jeff Chandler. For many stars, this was their first time in front of a microphone, and they were surprised at how exact the timing had to be. Director Frank Woodruff said that this sometimes intensified stage fright with some actors. Joan Crawford, for example, went through rehearsals without a hitch, but during the performance, she was so nervous she could barely hold her script as her hands were shaking so much. Each show promised a spectacular lineup of stars and stories, and the show remained in the top 10 through most of its run. Fred McMurray and Loretta Young had the most appearances on the show, with 26 for McMurray and 25 for Young. Other regulars included Barbara Stanwyck, Cary Grant, and Don Amici. DeMille would remark, "I wouldn't take $1 million for the experience I've had in radio." In January of 1945, DeMille would leave the show after a dispute with the American Federation of Radio Artists concerning Proposition 12. This was a California proposition that would allow anyone to work in radio with or without union membership. The ARFA mandated a $1 fee per appearance for every unionized actor in an attempt to raise funds to fight against it. DeMille disagreed with this tactic, and after a lengthy battle, he left the show. William Kiley was his replacement. In addition to focusing on attracting big stars, the show also put great importance on production value. Dunn relates in his book, the sound man Charlie Forsythe was equipped with a Lux Soundmobile containing sophisticated recording equipment for capturing authentic sounds as he traveled during summer breaks. Overall, the Lux Radio Theater had a long and successful run on the radio. As with all of the radio shows, television soon took over in American homes. Many shows transitioned to television as the luster of radio faded. After 21 seasons and 926 shows, the final show aired on June 7th, 1955. Thanks for joining us for this look at the Lux Radio Theater.